Welcome back on this Thursday. It's turning out to be a fantastic Thursday thus far. As hoping that you've been enjoying your morning cup of tea right here. Joining me now on the Flow video line, Mrs. Beverly Poyotte. She is the Director of Human Services. She has been a public servant for some 28 years, and during that time, all of that time, she has served within social services in a various positions. She's also a trained counselor. Work priority over the years focused on children, adolescents, and the family. Madam Director, good morning. Thanks for agreeing to come on.
Good morning, Mr. LeBon.
Nice to have you. Tell us about, first of all, the Department of Human Services. We've heard the name quite often, but what's your mandate?
Okay, so at the Division of Human Services, our main mandate is that of child care and protection. So it means we work with children who are vulnerable, specifically those children who have been in situations of abuse, neglect, and abandonment. Coming out of that, we have a foster care program, which we also work with at Human Services. And we also, in collaboration with the Attorney General's chambers, deal with adoption matters. The division also has a very small elder care unit. As we would all know, the Ministry of Health has taken over now has a elderly affairs. However, that unit still resides with the Division of Human Services until all of the logistics and the policies are put in place so that the other unit within the Ministry of Health is up and running. But our main mandate is to work with children, ensuring that the nation's children are properly cared for.
Very, very important mandate that you have. How big is the issue of child vulnerability here? How serious of it is a concern?
Okay, so child vulnerability, we think that based on what we have seen in the last years, that it is becoming a major concern for us. And I say that because we recognize that our children are vulnerable, not just in terms of sexual abuse, because when you talk about abuse of children, that is what most people think about, but in many other ways. I listened to Mr. Moise, and he mentioned a few areas when we look at things, issues of poverty, when we look at issues of child care, for example. We have a lot of young parents, we have a lot of young families who are not able to provide the type of care that is necessary, that is needed by their children. If we look at, in years gone by, where you had grandparents, you had great-grandparents, you had aunts and uncles who could be at home to assist in child care. Now that is not always the case. You have less instances where family support is actually provided in terms of raising children. So it means you have more children being left on their own. And once you have children being left on their own with little supervision, then of course we're going to have those kinds of issues that we see rearing their ugly heads in our society.
Yeah, one of these issues which you rightfully said occupies a lot of time is sexual abuse of minors, and perhaps it's because it's a sensational topic as well. But how do you first, as a department, as a division of human services, respond to these reports and these cases?
Okay, so any form of abuse, whether it is sexual abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, or even neglect, a child being left in the home uncared for, can be reported directly to the Division of Human Services. Alternatively, it can be reported to the police. Either way, that case would eventually find its way to the Division of Human Services, where an investigation would take place. So let's look at a situation where it's reported to Human Services. If it is a case of child abuse, we would then work closely with the Vulnerable Persons Unit of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. We work closely with them in terms of taking statements from the children, in terms of helping those children to understand what it is that has gone, that has happened to them. So we would then work with the child, and by extension, we work with the family, because the child is part of a unit. Unfortunately, one of the challenges that we sometimes have is that the child is not believed by the family. And so if what the child is saying is not believed, then now we have to find alternative ways to keep that child safe.
Yeah.
And so that is where maybe the foster care program would come in if there is no family who can then assist that child.
Just hold on for
We
me. Just
also,
hold on for me,
mhm.
please. How much does that occurrence of the child not being believed or being made to believe that he or she is lying or not telling the truth, how much does that further compound the trauma that the victim faces?
Oh, tremendously. Because if I am telling my parents something that has happened to me and she doesn't believe me, it now says to me that not only am I a liar, but that my mother doesn't care or does not
Mm.
appreciate me enough. My mother or father, whichever parent, does not care enough to believe what I'm saying, does not care enough to protect me, does not care enough to put me first. And so that can have severe psychological consequences and impacts on the child. So that is why it is very important that for us as social workers, any child who comes in and says, this is what has happened to me, whether you want to believe the child or not, we have to believe the child. And then it is only through our investigation, through talking with the child, speaking with the family, and allowing the police now to go ahead and do the investigations, that the evidence will point to whether this has truly happened or not.
Excellent. Post your investigation, what is your role in as far as ensuring that that victim gets the care that they need?
Okay, so our role is to assist this child. So we would go as far as working with the schools, because sometimes it may be necessary to do a school transfer or to, do things differently within the school
Mm.
system. There may be some form of bullying in the school, so we go into the schools and speak with the counselors, the principals, and so on, to assist that child in maintaining, a normal school life balance. We also work with the child in terms of providing counseling. However, I must stick a pin here, Mr. LeBon, to say that for us, this has been a big challenge in terms of providing the levels of counseling that we need to provide, not only to the child, but sometimes to the
The
entire
family.
family, the
Mm-hmm.
extended family, because this is not just a trauma for the child, this is also a trauma for the family, especially when we're looking at situations where maybe that the abuse was perpetrated by a member of the family. And so that has been a major challenge for us in terms of providing that kind of psychological and psychosocial, well, more psychological support for the child. But with the limited resources that we have, we do provide that. And in some instances, we work with our sister agencies um, where we refer the clients to get that kind of assistance.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. We know that you can do a lot more with more counselors and greater training for your counselors as well, especially for you to protect and provide that care that these victims rightfully need. Yeah,
Definitely,
rightfully need.
definitely. I mean, one of the things that we have spoken about is, for human services, the mandate of the department, it may seem like it is focused on, children, which it is. It may not seem as broad as it really is, because at the end of the day, it is one unit, one department within the government that has to provide for the entire country.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is essential for that unit to be properly staffed and to be properly resourced. Because even listening to the previous caller, not caller, sorry, the
Yes, yeah.
previous presenter, yes, Mr. Moise, we recognize that the work that we do is crucial in terms of what is happening in our society. He spoke to families, and I am in agreement with him on that. whatever happens within our families filters into our society, and vice versa. Whatever happens in our communities filters into our families. And so we have to provide the services, we have to be able to provide the programs, we have to be able to put policies in place that would assist us in getting all of these things off of the ground so that our children, their parents, and our families can have the necessary resources to get them from where they are to where they want to be. Because what we recognize is that a lot of times people truly want to do better. People truly want to, gain experiences and do the right thing. But if we do not have the facilities to do that, if we do not have the persons to come in and assist in doing so, what is there for them to do? How are they now going to get through that? Not everybody is as self-motivated as we would like them to be to go online and look for courses and do all of these kinds of things. So we have to put these things on the ground and make it available for our citizens in order for them now to be able to get to that place where they can properly take care of their family, themselves and their families.
Yeah, back on the issue of the sexual violation of young children. One of the major factors which always comes to play after your investigation and the counseling is the need for some sort of foster care, because in a lot of these cases you appreciate that the violator is oftentimes close to the victim, and there is need to maybe separate the victim from that environment. How big of a challenge is it for the state, the issue of foster care, adequate facilities for foster care?
Okay, we do have some challenges in that regard. However, we have been very successful in placing many of our children who we think need to be removed from their homes. But I must also say that removing a child from the home is not the first thing that we do. Generally, if we have a situation where, there is tension in the home, if the perpetrator is in the home, we would see whether it is possible through the courts for the perpetrator to be removed from the home and not the child, because the child has not done anything wrong. And so sometimes it seems as if removing the child is punishing the child for coming forward and saying, this is what has happened to me. So if it is a situation where the perpetrator cannot be removed and the child has to be removed for various reasons, the most obvious being that the persons within the home do not believe what the child is saying, we generally look to family members first for caring for that child before we go to a non-family member where the foster care kicks in. So if the child is placed with a family member, that is what we call kinship foster care. If they are placed outside of the home, it is just regular foster care. And with that program, we try to assist the foster carers with a monthly stipend and with various other initiatives that we have, such as education supplies at the beginning of the school year. So we do try to assist our foster carers. It's not adequate, but we do try to assist them as much as we possibly can within our financial limitations.
Excellent. Thanks for that information. As we wind down, we're speaking here with the head of the Human Services Division on this edition of the program for today, Thursday. As we wind down, speak to us about the amount of children who you anticipate fall within that bracket of vulnerability here on the island.
In the absence of statistics right now, I would say maybe about 35% of our children, 35 to 40% of our children. And I say that number, it may seem like a low number because I don't want to categorize and bracket our children. However, when we look at vulnerability, again, we're looking at not just vulnerable to acts of abuse, but vulnerable in terms of poverty.
living conditions.
Yes, exactly. I'm vulnerable in terms of one of the challenges we have also, which causes our children to be even more vulnerable, is the whole issue of registration of children. So children are being born, and sometimes they are not registered. So by the time that child comes to us, they don't have a birth certificate. And so we also assist with that process of getting necessary identification documents for our children. And so a child who is not registered, what does that say? That this child does not exist. And sometimes, even if they are registered, there's no name on the birth certificate. And so I just want to send out, a message to parents out there that it is important that once the child is born, that simple but vital component is taken care of. Because in the long run, it causes more issues for the child, for us at the division, and also for the Registry of Civil Status to be able to rectify some of those anomalies.
Yeah. Excellent. Before winding down, I know many citizens would be interested in hearing an update from you. Have you had an intervention on that matter involving the 11-year-old and the most recent matter with the 4-year-old in Dennery?
The 11-year-old, I'm not sure which one you're talking about.
And it's shocking that you would respond that way. I'm just saying shocking because apparently you have a whole ton of these cases coming to your office.
Not a whole ton, but sufficient that, I can't just assume I know which case you're talking about.
I was referring to the one with the alleged perpetrator being a police officer. Have you had any intervention to give the victim some care there?
Yes, Human Services has been involved in this matter. As I indicated earlier, we work very closely with the police. So from the initial report, Human Services was informed, and Human Services and the Vulnerable Persons team worked together to get all of the necessary information in order for that case to move forward.
Yeah. And anything on the case in Denver for 4-year-old girl, has that been reported to you?
That one I am not 100% sure of, but I am sure it probably has been reported to our intake officer, and I will get further details on it once that becomes available. But what I want to say is that a lot of times people report cases and expect immediate results. It is important for the public to note, number one, where they need to report cases. What are the agencies where cases need to be reported? And what are the steps that need to be taken once a case is reported? When a case is reported, as I indicated, there have to be certain investigations done. There have to be certain things in place before we can move forward, before we can even say anything about the case. Even talking about a case in the media, we have to be very careful what it is we say and how it is we say it. Because at the end of the day, this is somebody's personal information. I always like to make the analogy of going to the doctor. The doctor has your file, and in that file has all of your medical information. Is it fair? Is it right for the doctor to now, in speaking, divulge information about your medical history? And so it is a very similar thing for us at Human Services. There are ethics and there are issues of confidentiality that we have to take into consideration whenever we're speaking about cases, or if the occasion arises that we should speak about cases. And many times you hear people saying, oh, Human Services is not doing anything about it. Human Services is not saying anything about it. That is not necessarily so. It is just that this is a personal matter to somebody. Everybody's matter is personal. Everybody's matter is their matter. If the person comes out and speaks about it, that is their prerogative. But Human Services cannot and should not on its own come out there and give information about any pertinent case. If we are talking about a situation where the police is making a report, the police, based on its mandate, can do that. And they also have specific parameters within which they can do that. And so a lot of occasions when we have situations like that, there would be some kind of relationship, some kind of rapport between human services and the police as to what this is that can come out, that can be said to the public. But I want the public to be rest assured that at the division, with the resources we have, we are doing the best that we can to serve our children.
Yeah, let me just opine here before we let you go that, and on instances where the division has to comment it within the media and publicly, I don't think it's necessary for us to be speaking details reference to a victim of such a matter. So I just wanted to put that in there. But finally, before you go, with all the cases you've seen, we need a sex offenders registry, you believe?
My personal opinion, it's probably a good idea. However, I think it needs to be properly executed so that once, if and when it is done, that it is done in the correct way. Remember, we live in a very small society. And in a lot of cases, when you go into communities, the communities can tell you so-and-so does whatever it is, or so-and-so has done whatever it is. And so it is something I think that we really have to discuss before it can get off the ground, because at the end of the day, we still, those persons who are perpetrators, yes, they have to, there are consequences for their actions, but as any human rights person would tell you, they have rights as well. I'm not putting their rights above that of a child, but it is something that needs a lot of discussion if and when it is to come off the ground.
I'll ask you your professional position of the year.
My professional.
I said I'll ask you your professional opinion when we get off there. You don't have to. You don't have to.
Okay.
Beverly Poyotte, Director of Human Services Division. Thanks so much, my dear, for coming on this morning.
Thank you very much for having me. Just before we go, if you have one more minute, I would just like to encourage us all. Later this month, the 19th and the 20th of November, we are celebrating 2 days with reference to children. The 19th is World Prevention Day of Child Abuse, and the 20th is International Children's Day. And so on these 2 days, I just want to encourage us all to celebrate our children, to tell them that you love them, to show them that you love them, to encourage them to be better persons. And those who are already doing what is best for them, just to continue to edify them. And so the division is planning a number of activities for the weeks surrounding those 2 days. You will be seeing that coming out in the media, and I would just like everybody to support, as I said, and to encourage and celebrate our children throughout this month of November, where we have 2 days where that are specifically for our children.
You'll keep us posted, and we'll transmit the information to our audiences right here.
Thank you very much for that.
Madam Director, thank you for coming on today, Thursday. She is the Director of Human Services within that division. Her name, Beverly Poyotte, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Beverly Poyotte, my special guest to end this edition of the program. We'll be back tomorrow with another exciting and informative line. I promise you have something special in store for you tomorrow as we wind down this week. Next week, we begin our Christmas programming right here on the platform. Good morning, St. Lucia. Thank you for making us your choice. Do continue to enjoy the rest of your Thursday. On behalf of everyone, my entire team, take good care of yourselves and each other.